and we'll send you a link to access it once we're wrapped up. You'll also get a link in that same email to download the PowerPoint slides, as well as quite a few resources that our panelists have shared. If you are able to stay through the whole presentation, which we certainly hope you are, we will be accepting questions, and you can send those in to us throughout the webinar, and then we'll hold a Q&A session at the end. To ask a question, you can type your question into the chat box in your control panel, and I'll put it into the queue to be answered during that Q&A period. If you do have a question that is specifically for one of our panelists, please include his or her name along with your question so that we're sure to direct it to the right person. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, you can use that same chat feature to get my attention, and I'll do my best to resolve the problem for you. One of the most common issues that people run into is a lag either in the audio or sometimes in the advancing of the slides. And this is usually just due to an internet bandwidth issue, and usually sorts itself out. But in particular, if you're having trouble with the audio, you can disconnect from your computer audio and then dial in with the phone number that's given in your control panel. You can stay connected to see the slides advancing, but your audio may be more clear and consistent through the phone. All right, so we are pleased to have several leaders in the field of social and emotional learning with us today to share their expertise and insights. We're going to be hearing shortly from Matt Atwell, who has been a member of the Civic team since 2015. Matt spends his days conducting data analysis and research on a diverse set of policy areas, including the education gap, civic health, entrepreneurship, economic opportunity, and social and emotional learning. Matt is joined by Jessica Kardashian, and she is the director of the Washington, D.C. office and director of federal policy at the Learning Policy Institute, where she plays a leadership role in developing federal legislative strategy and co-leads the Learning Policy Institute's policy team. Ellen Fern is also with us, and she is the Managing Director of Federal Relations at Bose Public Affairs Group. She has broad experience in legislative affairs, appropriations, coalition building, managing and developing public education campaigns, and grassroots advocacy. Michelle Gaines is with us, and she coordinates Florida's statewide school-based surveillance efforts, analyzing and interpreting student survey data regarding outcomes and program improvement. As part of this role, Michelle develops and produces technical assistance documents and reports to implement state policy. And we also have Dana Godek, who works predominantly on policy-related data to support initiatives that assist state education agencies as they plan, develop, and implement statewide SEL policies and practices. In her role, she systemically analyzes SEL and workforce readiness policies, as well as other related policies to advance CASEL's Collaborating States initiative. And last, but very much not least, we have Nick Yoder with us, and he is Director of Practice and Policy at CASEL. He leads the technical assistance that CASEL offers the state education agencies and co-designs a research agenda to better understand and guide the state level network. So we are excited to have all of these panelists with us to dive into funding around social and emotional learning. Nick is going to get us started with some background about CASEL and the Collaborating States initiative.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to get us started today. I am Nick Yoder, the Director of Policy and Practice at CASEL. We at CASEL and with our partners, we are excited to speak with you today about funding and social emotional learning, using funds from federal, state, and local dollars to support SEL implementation across the nation. In case you are not familiar with CASEL, we are a nonprofit that founded the field of SEL 25 years ago. We uniquely work across and collaborate with our leading organizations through connecting SEL research, practice, and policy to ensure evidence-based, equity-focused, systemic SEL nationwide. Although we have multiple efforts to advance SEL across our organization, I want to highlight two key partnerships with districts and states across the country. Our Collaborating Districts Initiative, sorry, you can go to the next slide. Our Collaborating Districts Initiative, or CDI, was launched 10 years ago with 3 districts. We now partner with 20 school districts in an effort to better understand quality SEL implementation. The districts are pioneering SEL in their communities and informing our suite of resources that are accessed for free by educators around the world. Our Collaborating States Initiative, or CSI, launched in 2016 and has grown from 8 states to 38 plus states, which is a testament to the growing interest and demand for social emotional learning. Through the CSI, we help states create the conditions on the ground where SEL can thrive. Since its launch, we've seen overwhelming progress and movement in states developing social-emotional competencies or defining what students should know and be able to do developmentally, the development of implementation guides, and the creation and implementation of professional learning for districts and school staff. Based on these partnerships, we know that funding and sustaining SEL long-term can pose a challenge in many communities. The goal of this webinar is to offer knowledge and strategies that can help mitigate this challenge. We have a lot of great content for you all in the next 75 minutes, and Jessica will get us started by providing an overarching framing of the importance of SEL and the multiple policy and practice levers that we can use to support SEL implementation. Jessica, take it away.
Great, thank you, Nick, and thank you everyone for joining. Good morning as well. I want to begin by sharing some data demonstrating why this work is so important and why it requires changes in policies and practices, not only within the individual school, but across states and districts. We know that a significant number of children are growing up in poverty and experience traumatic events from birth through K through 12. But these statistics aren't meant to be a reason why students can't be successful. They are meant to demonstrate that school systems need to be designed in ways that meet the social, emotional, and academic needs of all students. Next slide, please. Research shows that there are a number of policies and practices that can mitigate the effects of trauma and improve outcomes for students regardless of their circumstances. Next slide, please. This research consistently shows that implementing policies that focus on the social, emotional, and academic needs of students improves a number of outcomes for students. It also improves the experiences of their peers. Yet, despite the importance of SEL practices, the overwhelming majority of educators do not feel prepared to meet or teach to these skills. Next slide, please. There are a number of systems-level policies that can be adopted at the state and local level to support educators and students across all schools. These include changes to statewide accountability and improvement systems, and although all states have submitted their ESSA plans, they are open for amendments. Being clear about the competencies students are expected to demonstrate. Next slide, please. States and districts can use information from student, staff, and family surveys to inform these practices, which requires training on how not only to implement these surveys, but use them to inform the appropriate strategies and resources. States should also be clear about what is expected of educators and aligning those expectations across teacher and leader preparation and licensure requirements. Next slide, please. Systems level change at the school level is also critically important so that we don't have pockets of success in individual classrooms. Rather, we have entire schools and districts designed to meet the needs of all students. These include designing schools to support strong student-teacher relationships as well as strong student-adult relationships throughout the entire building, creating identity-safe and responsive classrooms for all students, and providing or connecting students with the supports they need, for example, to address food or housing insecurity or the mental and physical health needs of students. Next slide, please. Additional supports should be provided when needed and be as family inclusive as possible. Next slide, please. Finally, it's important to invest in policies that support educators. These include investing in educator wellness and high-quality teacher preparation programs that are designed to prepare teachers and school leaders for today's classrooms and tomorrow's. And this may include partnerships between districts and universities and other institutions of higher ed that provide teacher and leader preparation programs. Next slide, please. Comprehensive teacher and leader preparation programs should provide extensive in-classroom experience, tightly integrated with rigorous coursework prior to teachers becoming the teacher of record and principals leading a school. States should also invest in making sure these types of high-quality pathways are accessible to all students. We know that college affordability can often be a barrier for those entering the profession and those making decisions even once they complete an undergraduate program in education to actually enter the field. These include providing loan forgiveness and service scholarship programs that support a diverse and well-prepared teacher and leader program. Next slide, please. Today, we are going to talk about how these types of policies and practices can be supported by the funding available at the federal level, including through the Every Student Succeeds Act, and ways to leverage those resources with existing state and local resources. While funding may come from different sources, it is important that states, districts, and schools align their policies across programs. And with that, I will now hand it over to Matt, who will lead us through the conversation regarding federal funding.
Thanks, Jessica. So we've broken down the section on federal funds into two primary pieces. I'm Matt Atwell, Senior Research and Policy Analyst at Civic, and I'll be doing the first part, giving a brief overview, and then talking about some non-ESSA funding streams that can be used to support SEL in schools and whole child approaches to education. Then Ellen Fern will tell you all you need to know about both formula and discretionary funding available through the Every Student Succeeds Act. Next slide, please. To start out, some quick context on how Civic comes to this work and really the breadth of federal funding streams that exist. In 2003, Civic CEO John Bridgeland co-chaired the White House Task Force on Disadvantaged Youth. As part of this work, the task force found 339 different federal programs that focused on supporting opportunity youth, spending $220 billion. While not necessarily SEL related, this gives you a sense of the scope of funding on youth-serving programs in the US. Fast forward to 2018, and as part of the work of the National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development, the Commission began looking at funding sources for SEL and found over 120 potential funding streams for SEL. Next slide, please. Again, this is a bevy of federal programs, making the landscape very difficult to navigate. However, there are resources that exist to help policy makers mix and match different funds and here are just a few of those. The Association of Government Accountants offers a guide for blending and braiding federal funding and how to ensure you're using funds appropriately while doing so. Spark Policy Institute offers a step-by-step guide with helpful templates and examples to guide you as you identify, explore, develop, and implement a financing plan. The Council of Chief State School Officers released a resource guide for state-level policymakers focused on potential funding to improve conditions for learning in 2019. That included strategies for states as well as examples of what states are actually doing. And then there are several states that have their own guides, mostly focused on funding streams under ESSA. Finally, Civic is working hard on a tool for federal funding streams that can support SEL, and while still a work in progress, we are hopeful we'll have something to share in the fall, but we're also open to feedback from folks listening that work for SEAs and LEAs on how we can distill the info we have into something that is helpful for the field. So if you have ideas and want to send them along, my email will be available at the end of the deck, and please do not hesitate to follow up afterwards. Next slide, please. The first program I'm going to be talking about are Promise Neighborhoods. Promise Neighborhoods is run by the Department of Education and was appropriated $80 million in discretionary funding in fiscal year 2020. Promise Neighborhoods are a place-based strategy to ensure all children have access to great schools and strong systems of community and family support in high needs areas. Institutes of higher education, Indian tribes and tribal governments, and nonprofits working with high needs LEAs, local governments, or tribal organizations are eligible to apply for grants. Eligible organizations also are required to work with at least one public school in the area in coordination with the LEA. The grants support a wide range of efforts to provide a continuum of services that can include programs to support the social and emotional development of children and youth in the target school and community through both in and out of school programming, as well as family engagement initiatives. The grants can also be used to support community schools that offer school-based comprehensive services. Grantees are also encouraged to braid their Promise Neighborhood grants with other federal and public and private resources to expand the services they are able to provide. Next slide, please. Both of the next two funding streams I'm going to talk about deal with specific populations and are funded by the Department of Education. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act Part B funds are grants to states that must be used only to pay the excess costs of providing a free and appropriate education to students with disabilities. IDEA Part B received $13.8 billion in the appropriations bill that was recently signed into law. SEAs mainly use these funds to cover administrative services. The majority of the money that is not reserved at the state level then continues to flow to LEAs, where they again are reserved for supporting students with disabilities. Grants are distributed to LEAs based on a formula that consists of a base payment and amounts that are determined based on poverty and population levels. LEAs are eligible to apply for IDEA grants if they are responsible for providing a free and appropriate education. As part of the grant, SEAs are specifically authorized to assist LEAs in providing positive behavioral interventions and supports for children with disabilities. Although IDEA funds are only allowed to be used to support students with disabilities, nothing would prevent an SEA or LEA that coordinates services for children with disabilities as part of a larger initiative. An LEA focused on improving the education of students with disabilities may wish to design an integrated approach that considers all available funding, including IDEA, to support services to all categories of children. McKinney-Vento is similar in that it is the national program that supports students that are identified as experiencing homelessness in the United States. Funding comes from the Department of Education through the Education of Homeless Children and Youth program. To receive formula funds, SEAs must designate a state coordinator to administer the funds, as well as other statutory requirements. Funding is allocated to states based on their Title I Part A allocation. States then must give no less than 75% of their allocation to LEAs through competitive grants that are awarded based on need and quality of application. Now, every state awards grants a little differently, so it'll be important to understand the exact McKinney-Vento funding formula in your state. Districts must similarly designate a district liaison tasked with identifying students experiencing homelessness and coordinating support for these students. In addition, any district receiving Title I Part A funds must set aside a portion of these funds to support students experiencing homelessness. McKinney-Vento funds can be used for a wide variety of purposes to allow students to effectively and equitably access education services. While this often takes the look of meeting basic needs, and liaisons will tell you the money doesn't go very far, it can also be used for things like multi-tiered systems of support, extended learning time, or parental involvement. McKinney-Vento funds have also been used by school districts to set up trauma-informed practices that SEL can intentionally be embedded into. One example of this is in New York State, where a portion of their McKinney-Vento grant was set aside for an enhanced grant for trauma-informed care. Every trauma-informed grantee was required to do programming in 3 areas: creating a safe and supportive learning environment, fostering attachment to a nurturing adult, and strengthening non-cognitive skills, which shows the potential for McKinney-Vento funds to support SEL in schools. Next slide, please. I'm going to quickly hit on 3 non-Department of Education programs. Medicaid pays for health and related services provided in schools when covered services are provided to Medicaid enrolled children, or when services are provided to a child through his or her IEP under IDEA. Allowable uses of funds differ based on states, but generally schools are able to use Medicaid on services for children with disabilities, services provided by school-based health centers, and for some administrative services. SEAs may wish to work with LEAs in the state to expand the use of Medicaid as a source of funding for health and mental health related elements of a strategy to support whole child education. One example of this is using Medicaid funds to bring in mental health social workers that provide supports for students with mental health or behavioral issues. The Corporation for National and Community Service supports AmeriCorps and Vistas. Notably, education is one of CNCS's principal areas of focus, with more than half of CNCS's budget supporting education-related programs. AmeriCorps and Vistas are key assets for hundreds of SEL programs, with more than 44,000 AmeriCorps members annually providing in-school and out-of-school support to students enrolled in almost 12,000 schools. Some LEAs have used AmeriCorps members as part of a school-based mentoring or attendance program, while others have used them intentionally as social and emotional learning coaches. And CNCS also provides a really helpful guide on how national service can support schools. SEAs and LEAs are authorized to apply directly to CNCS for support. They may also apply as part of a partnership with a nonprofit that already receives AmeriCorps members or that may act as intermediaries. Finally, the Child Care and Development Block Grant is operated by the Office of Child Care under the Department of Housing and Human Services and the Administration for Families, for Children and Families, and provides funding to states for child care subsidies for low-income families with children. Funds can also be used to improve the quality of child care available to families within the state, as well as disseminating information to parents on available child care programs, including research and best practices on children's social and emotional development. CCDBG funds also may be used to support professional development of child care workforce, which explicitly includes effective behavior management strategies that promote social and emotional development. The Child Care and Development Block Grant is also a critical resource for summer and out-of-school programs that play a significant role in developing children's social and emotional competencies. Through C funds, states must submit an application to HHS that includes a safe plan and self-assessment. Discretionary funds are then allocated to states based on their population of children under age 5, share of children eligible for free and reduced price lunch, and state per capita income. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ellen Fern.
Thanks so much, Matt, and good morning, everyone. There really is greater opportunities now at the federal level through both formula funding, formula funding grants, which Matt just went through a lot of them, as well as discretionary grants, especially I would say through the Department of Education. And now I'm going to really laser focus on the Department of Education and opportunities there. And I really want to say there really is a new excitement and focus on social and emotional learning at the Department of Education and educating the whole child, which is really incredible because when we were all working on reauthorizing the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which is now known as the Every Student Succeeds Act, you will not find the word social and emotional learning in the statutory language. You will find language such as improving the conditions for learning and obviously supporting a whole child approach of education. But now, for instance, at the department, there is a new division program within the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, for example, that's focusing on teacher effective preparation and professional development and support. And there is a very big focus on the need for social emotional learning as part of Educator Prep, which is a new interest, as well as in the Office of Safe and Healthy Schools, there's actually a new national center to improve social emotional learning and school safety. Now this is, I just want to mention this, it is not a granting entity, but I quickly wanted to tell you that it is there to provide TA. It's supposed to be providing free resources to LEAs, SEAs, any programs, community-based organizations wanting to expand their knowledge and tools to expand social emotional learning. Hopefully it's supposed to be supporting networks of practice on this topic. So it's an exciting time. When we look now specifically at, I'm going to start with federal formula funding, two big pots of money, and I've already spoken about, obviously, the Every Student Succeeds Act, which does allow for an expanded definition of student success that does go well beyond reading, math, and science to include these, quote, conditions for learning where social and emotional learning fits in nicely. I also want folks to not forget the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act. This is another formula grant that goes to every state to support career and technical education programming, but that does include teaching and supporting employability skills of students, both actually from middle school through high school and post-secondary. And that key word where social emotional learning programs fits in from across the country is focused on employability skills, which we'll get to in a moment. Next slide, please. So let's first look at formula funding. And once again, these are funds that are non-competitive. All these funds go directly to state education departments that then subgrant it to local school districts. So probably many of you have heard of and work within and use Title I formula funds. In fiscal year 2020, we're talking about over $16 billion going to states that can be used for interventions to support student academic success and well-being. And that is a broad term. And once again, we know with ESSA, we can expand that beyond just reading, writing, science, and that obviously can include evidence-based social emotional learning program, as well as programs that are reaching out, focused on parent engagement activities. Also, Title II funds under ESSA, that is, it's not as big a funding stream as Title I, but that's over $2 billion going to states specifically to focus and support effective educator development. And that by educators, we mean teachers, principals, and school leaders. And once again, these formula funds, there's a lot of eligible activities that local school districts can use and supported by these funds. And that includes a lot of professional development support. It can be used around teacher, principal retention, certification, licensure. Every state, of course, does this differently and has different requirements, but these funds can be used at the school district level to help teach educators on how to implement social emotional learning in the classroom. It can also be used to support what we call adult social emotional learning, to support educators' own mental health, behavior management, and peer supports and communities of learning so they can be more effective educators in the classroom. Next slide, please. The funding stream that I'm most excited to tell you about, which is relatively new, and it was authorized as part of ESSA, is what the exciting name of Title 4A, excuse me, and that is the Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grants, and sort of probably at the local level, at the state level, it's just known as Title 4A funds. And in 4 short years, this funding stream has grown from $400 million in fiscal year 2017 to over $1 billion in fiscal year 2020. So this is a lot of money going to each and every state, and that funding formula is based on the Title I formula distribution. Now, each state has to allocate these dollars down to the local district level. And it is divided by 2 tiers. If a local district is getting at least $30,000, they must do a assessment, a needs assessment of what is needed by the schools in the district. Of this amount of money that each school district gets, 20% has to be focused on well-rounded education, 20% on safe and healthy students, and up to 5% can be used on technology needs. Now, in each of these pots of well-rounded education, that is available to support activities that are going to help students succeed academically while also having access to a well-rounded course load, which might include STEM, might include arts, but it's also supporting the conditions for learning of students. Social emotional learning programming can fit well into this category, as well as, of course, is safe and healthy student activities, which includes mental health, trauma-informed practices, anti-bullying. In a recent study, well, I'd say survey more than a study, conducted by something called the Title IV Coalition. They found that through self-reporting, 52.8% of districts that received Title IV A funding in fiscal year 19, a little over 52% were using these funds at the district level under the well-rounded category, and over 50% were also using these funds also through the safe and healthy students category. We're going to be hearing more about this directly from a district leader later, and right after I finish my my slide. So I do think it's the most exciting funding stream right now available to implement social emotional learning programs. Next slide, please. Also, lastly and not least is Title IV-B funding, which you can also see is well over $1 billion going to states. This is for the 21st Century Community Learning Center program, which supports before school, after school, and summer learning. And these also, each state gets a pot of funding and then holds a state competition down to local education agencies, also nonprofit organizations, faith-based organizations. Folks can apply together or singly to support a variety of out-of-school time programming, which, of course, social emotional learning is an important and integral component of many of these programs throughout the year. Next slide. I also want to get back to the career and technical education state grants that go to your state. Talking about employability skills, CASEL has identified 5 core competency that directly relates to core employability skills that will help students. This includes becoming more aware of their strengths and areas to improve, manage their emotions, resolve conflicts, and become more culturally proficient, collaborate effectively with others, and set positive goals and make positive decisions, which all would be seen as important and key ingredients of employers for looking for students out of post-secondary and high school that need these key employability skills to be successful in the workplace. And that does relate, can be related directly back to social emotional learning. So I encourage you all also to take a look at your CTE funding in your state and where those dollars are available. Next slide. Lastly, I'm going to talk about discretionary grants at the federal level at the Department of Education. These discretionary grants are competitive funding. You find out about them, they are noticed in the Federal Register. And this means that all funding doesn't go to states automatically. You have to look for these grant opportunities. But there are 4 key discretionary grants I wanted to tell you about quickly. One is it's called EIR, the Education, Innovation, and Research Program. This year, in fiscal year 20, Congress appropriated $190 million for this, but within this program, they explicitly stated they have set aside, they want the Department of Education to use at least $65 million directly to support evidence-based social emotional learning grants within this program. The eligible entities for an EIR grant, which overall supports innovative evidence-based proposals, are the eligible entities include LEAs, SEAs, the Bureau of Indian Education, nonprofit organizations, or a consortium of all of the above. But this is brand new and very exciting. We're looking forward to the Department of Education putting out their notice of proposals. We're expecting this hopefully in early spring, around March, to get these grants out. And so I encourage you to be looking for this through the Federal Register because of the explicit set aside for social emotional learning. There's also something called the SEED grants, Supporting Effective Educator Development Grant Program. There's $80 million appropriated in this current fiscal year. Also, Congress stated in the report that went along with the final spending bill that was signed by President Trump was directions to the Department of Education to use these grants to explicitly support professional development that helps educators incorporate SEL practices into their teaching. The eligible entities for seed grants, that is totally focused on improving the effectiveness of educators, are institutions of higher education, national nonprofits, organizations, or a partnership of those entities. So these discretionary grants do not go to SEAs or LEAs. They're trying to go to outside additional organizations to support the work of SEAs and LEAs in terms of educator effectiveness. There's also school safety, national activity grant monies, and $10 million within this program are focused on helping LEAs to increase and improve school mental health supports and supporting child development experts and improving school climate, making our classrooms safe and supportive and improving those conditions for learning. That's another opportunity to look at in terms of incorporating social emotional learning. And then lastly, full service community schools did get a healthy increase from Congress this year. So there's $25 million. These also are discretionary grants that are supporting the model of full service community schools that support obviously the academic supports of students, but also within a school building, explicitly helping schools, families, and communities work together to provide wraparound services, meeting the needs of families, students, as well as the community, all working together. And of course, within this notion and theory of fully supporting a school and community, certainly social emotional learning programming is an important aspect of that. And I'm going to stop there and throw it over to my colleague Michelle, who's now going to drill down to her experience in the state of Florida and how they're using some of these federal funds to support social emotional learning.
Hey, thank you so much, Ellen, and happy Friday, everyone. I'm very happy to be here with you today. I guess just a quick note about me. I am the current director of Title IV Part A. I know the beginning said a lot about surveillance. I do a little bit of that, but as the director of Title IV Part A, I oversee that wonderful program that Ellen was just talking about. So I'm very excited to share more about the program from Florida's lens, and also to share that I am the newly named Bureau Chief for Federal Programs. So other opportunities for collaboration will be coming down the pike, and I'll share more in just a second. So we can get started with my slides. So to kind of reiterate the point that Ellen was making about Title IV Part A, what is Title IV Part A? So we know it's about building capacity at the state level and the local level, and through three component areas: access to well-rounded education, safe and healthy school conditions for learning, and the third is the effective use of technology and digital literacy. Those three component areas make up Title IV Part A, and I always want to preface, we are student support and academic enrichment. So we need to have the students in the front of our minds, in the back of our minds, at the beginning of all of our planning to assure that they're getting their needs met through this funding. Next slide. So why SEL in Florida? Well, it started off with a conversation between the offices of Healthy Schools, Safe Schools, and Title IV Part A. We forged a partnership to build capacity at the state level, but also with our district partners. And with that, we had a couple of surveys to go out to our district folks, and they said, you know, we really need to strengthen our state and local prevention efforts. So that is how this work got started here at Department of Ed. And I'll quickly mention the Deputy Director of Safe Schools is Brooks Romanek. Penny Taylor is the Director of Healthy Schools, and our new partner through Student Services, Andrew Weatherall, is the director there. So all of us are working, linking arms to bring this work together. And so the things we're trying to accomplish is the implementation across the state. So The need is, how do we promote best practices around Florida? How do we really learn what each other's doing to share resources, tools, and how do we actually get the most bang for our buck in terms of having all these great minds in the room together? Now we can learn from one another, share our experiences, kind of help out with the successes and the challenges. And so that is really the purpose of us starting this SEL collaborative in Florida. Next, please. So, what are our funding priorities? Well, you can read there on the screen, but I wanted to quickly start off underneath the CASEL chart there, that the Florida Department of Education strategic goal assists with high student achievement. And you think about how that aligns with student support and academic enrichment, which is Title IV Part A. So how does this collaborative, this SEL district collaborative work? Well, we want to facilitate, one, the collaborative, where we meet quarterly to have webinars and conference calls to bring all that wonderful resource around the state together. And then we developed an interactive map to assist districts and actually folks from around the country to see what's happening in Florida. And I'll share in just a moment what that map looks like. And we also want to strengthen participation using our funds through Title IV Part A. So we say staff and professional development. We're also hiring staff to lead the way. Through our state Title IV Part A office, we are supporting our districts by approving their applications, which include positions to lead the SEL efforts in their districts. And we're actually supporting those efforts throughout the year. I'll share with just very quickly, one of our districts hired someone to lead their program. And in turn, he's gone out and gotten all these SEL champions from around his district doing a train-the-trainer model. They have a wonderful program that's called Celebration, SEL-abration, and it's really fantastic. So if you ever get a chance to come to Volusia County, that's in the Daytona Beach area, I recommend you check out what they're doing with SEL. But also one of our funding priorities is making sure that we are training teachers, support staff, and students. We have a partnership with our Bureau of Family and Community Outreach to reach our parents and our faith-based groups. So that is on the horizon, but for now, we're funding our district landscape map, we're funding the collaborative, and making sure these professional development opportunities are available statewide. Next slide, please. So here's the landscape map. What you see there is colors in tan and teal. So the teal or the blue districts, which are counties. If you click on each one of those, the website is listed there at the top. You can actually click on the map. Each one of those blue icons, you click on it, it shows who the district contact is, what type of resources they're using in their district, if they are working K-12, what is specific project or activity they're using, and it's very informative. The great thing about this landscape map is that each coordinator for every district who has access to this site, so they can upload information in real time to keep it current. It's a living website. It's a living landscape map, I should say, that helps districts and their surrounding partners know what's going on in real time. And there to the left of the state of Florida, you will see the CASEL approved reviewed SEL programs that are being implemented in Florida. We've had such great success that we are looking at how we can have a prevention conference and really have the crowning jewel being SEL as a major topic area. Next slide, please. Okay, so Title IV Part A, our state and our local focus, starting back in 2017 was the first year of our funding. I just wanted to give you a snapshot of what it looked like, how many districts were actually using their Title IV funds for SEL supported activities or projects or programs. So in year one, we had 23 of our 75 districts having some form of SEL practices in their applications. That you can see almost doubled in year two. And in year three, we're right at 67 of our LEAs, which is very exciting. I hope for 100% this year, but we're getting close. We have folks that are very interested and they're looking to their partners around the state from either their neighboring counties or size-like districts to see if there's anything they can glean to use. But the one message we've sent unanimously, and just as I said earlier with the partnership linking arms, is that This is not one more thing, and so we're trying to discuss how we can integrate and include this in things that already exist. There's a home for SEL, and our Title IV district leads are finding a way to bring it into their programs. And the last two bullets are our websites for Title IV Part A, our DOE web page, and our external website. Next slide, please. So our SEL partnerships, we're partnering with actually anyone. If you want to partner with us, we love it. Title IV Part A is very open arm. We're all about relationships. Internally to the Department of Ed, we're currently working with those bureaus listed there. Exceptional Student Education, that's where Student Services is housed. We're partnering with our Family and Community Outreach. That's where 21st Century federal program is housed. And of course, Safe Schools, where Brooks Romanek is the Deputy Director. They're a standalone entity here in the building. So a lot of wonderful relationship building with them and how they're growing in terms of what's happening in terms of mandate in Florida to bring SEL as part of that conversation with their safe priorities. And then, of course, the Standards and Instructional Support is the bureau where Healthy Schools and Title IV Part A is housed. We have all the content areas are here. We're partnering with social studies, gifted, science, math, health education, physical education, fine arts. If you want to partner with us, we are always willing and interested in having this dialogue. But again, having it on everyone's radar to how they can integrate into a content area, how we can integrate in their state conferences for a particular content. We are really interested in developing our SEL platform statewide in every manner possible. But moving on into our federal programs, we're currently working with 21st Century After School, leveraging some funds there, some opportunities on their platform in the after school setting, and also working with the Homeless Education Program. This is very promising because not only are we working with students, we're also working with parents in that Homeless Ed program, and it's extremely promising. And with that being said, I mentioned earlier about my new job. Well, we will be working very closely with Title I Part C, which is migrant education. We will also be working with Title V, our rural and low income title program, and also Title II, our professional development. Title IV Part A is connected at the hip with Title II right now, but with regards to SEL, we have not broached that subject yet, but we will be doing that in the subsequent months ahead. And also, I want to bring up that CTE is definitely an area that we are partnering with. Again, we brought in a project this year working with the Boy Scouts of America. One of their platforms is how SEL can actually fit into their organization. And we've gotten some wonderful reviews on the project that we have rolling with them this year. And I'd love to share out later on what that really looks like. Again, our partnerships include the Florida PTA, again, leveraging opportunities, leveraging their conference time, making sure we have sessions that include our social and emotional learning at their conferences, whether it's a leadership conference or a statewide conference, we are embedded with that organization. And then lastly, I wanted to mention the Florida Technology Council. We, Title IV Part A, sponsored the Symposium for Science and Math and Arts this year, and we had 3 regional events around the state. It was really a 4-day event at each region, and the Florida Technology Council partnered with us to bring in industry leaders, CEOs, tech giants who are part of that council to sit on a panel to discuss employability skills. And I know Ella mentioned that earlier, but it is so real to hear a business owner or business leader talk about what they need for the next generation of employees, for people to make a difference in their current landscape of their profession. So we were excited to have them there. They gave real advice to teachers about what they're looking for, what they need their help from the classroom teacher to support, especially in science and math. And we want to take that same type of platform from the Technology Council to the other content areas. But again, a very promising partnership, again, leveraging funds, braiding some of our funds, making sure those opportunities exist for everyone who wants to be at the table. Next slide. So here's a slide with contact information I wanted to share with you. Also wanted to share that January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and that's one area that we have had some great inroads to providing some integration to some of our advocacy groups for the continuum of care and wraparound services dealing with our safe homes and those students specific who are returning to schools and to their traditional communities. So I just wanted you to recommend that you think outside the box when you're thinking about SEL and how we can support other types of areas that may be not on your radar right now. But Title IV Part A has the resources, the flexibility to fund, to partner with a myriad of groups. So we really appreciate the opportunity just to share just a snapshot of what's happening here in Florida. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle. This is Dana Godek. I just want to say it's an honor to be a part of such an esteemed group of panelists. And it's really an honor that those of you who have joined us today have invested your time in equipping yourself with knowledge and information to advance the work of SEL within your localities. That's a testament to your commitment to youth. So I just on a personal note want to really appreciate that. We heard a lot of very good points, and I'm going to underscore a couple of them, but I'm also really going to take this down to a practical level. So if we can go into the next slide, I am a policy associate with CASEL, but I am most recently have departed from a very large LEA and the state of Florida. So hello to Michelle and congratulations on your role as Bureau Chief for Federal Programs. That's really exciting for our state. In that role, I led federal and state program efforts for 8 years, and like I said, a very large district. And prior to that, led federal and state program efforts in a rural district in the state of Virginia. So I like to think that I have a pretty balanced concept on how to apply some federal funds. And as I mentioned, I just want to underscore a few of the things that were said. First and foremost, community conversations on SEL are critical, right? Because at the end of the day, what we're looking for is to make the case for the support of the social, emotional, academic development of our students and our youth. So Jessica made a few points relative to climate surveys and restorative justice programs, data, etc. I just want to underscore that a bit to say, using all of that data, equipping and arming yourself with that data on a local level is really what's going to help you make that case for support with either your school district, if you're outside the district, or internally if you're looking to blend and braid funds, as Michelle mentioned. So there's an interesting requirement in the blending and braiding of funds and in all ESSA-related funds, which is comprehensive needs assessment. Comprehensive needs assessment is, as the title implies, a look at community data, environmental data, student data, and youth data that helps make that case for support. So if you are external to your school district and have access and availability to those kinds of data, my recommendation to you is to synthesize that information, reach out to the school district, whoever is managing federal funds within the school district, and offer that as an item or an element that they can use in their contemplation of building a program plan. If you're within the school district, you have access, of course, to social emotional learning related data, but it is incumbent on us as good stewards of our communities to share that information outward, right? So as we're developing our CNAs, being sure that we're getting viewpoints from multiple stakeholders and really informing the development of our programs and practices, which ultimately leads to a community action plan in a perfect world, right? So in Palm Beach County, which is the school district I just left, we developed a community action plan known as Birth to 22, and I'm going to walk through some of the steps of that process with you in just a minute. The second point I want to make before that is it's important to spend a little bit of time and effort considering the desired level of direct involvement. And what I mean by that is relative to Matt's point on IDEA and McKinney-Vento and CNCS, many agencies and organizations have very focused efforts relative to their priorities, their mission, things that they are trying to accomplish. So they may want to be very directly involved in advancing an SEL strategy at a local level, but maybe they're not ready for that either. So my best advice to you is, again, to equip them with the case for support, with those data, to start building momentum in that direction, but realize that each agency has to sort of make its own judgment call on what level of involvement they want to have, whether it be from a programmatic level or a direct service level. Next, I want to make the point about risk mitigation, right? So as we identify partners within the implementation of our SEL strategies at a local level, they each have their own missions, and their missions may or may not include a definition of SEL that we feel is consistent with the literature. So my recommendation in considering that at a practical level is to just really think through some of the things that Ellen mentioned concerning Title I and Title II, and consider really what the intent of those funds are. So it's public-facing information on ed.gov and HUD and other agencies on what a formula allocation is to an LEA or a school district. So it's a good information to arm and equip yourself with, but also to be familiar with some of the intent, compliances associated with those federal funds so you can have a meaningful conversation and fulfill what your common definition of SEL is. Last point I want to make before we get into just some self-check questions that you may want to consider is the availability of funds and resources. So many partners within your community have high profile, what I'd call high profile events or activities on the horizon. So these are opportunities to leverage the case for support, the community conversations that you've facilitated and been hosting to make that case for support something that is shared across the community. So in the best of all worlds, SEL isn't just showing up within your agency or within one specific plan, but it's shared across a community construct. And that the best way to approach that is to be familiar with when your partners, when these other agencies are really having those moments when they are having those community conversations, guided redactions, building their plans, so that you're able to participate and be part of that. Next, please. Some questions to consider in that practical approach. Who are my local partners, right, in service of SEL? That's something that is easily done through an environmental scan, and look at partner agencies within the community that have had direct service programs, youth service programs, concerned with youth formation, youth development. My practical application for that is in the community in which I live, we've conducted an environmental scan of all agencies that are in service of SEL. And about 4 years ago, we synthesized those data to look at common intersection points within those missions, within those strategic plans, so we could really elevate a common community conversation and vision for SEL. This is where that SEL definition will really serve you very, very well. So you can understand in communicating with partner agencies what SEL is and what SEL isn't to avoid some of that mission creep and really provide high quality programs for students. In doing an environmental scan and developing a plan like that, the important question to ask yourself and your partners are, what are their funding priorities, right? So in the case of the partnership scan that we conducted 4 years ago, that I mentioned before, it is called Birth to 22 and is a comprehensive youth master plan for the whole of Palm Beach County, which, by the way, is roughly about the size of the state of Delaware. So it's a really big county here in Florida. So in examining agencies' funding cycles, we were able to determine which agencies might have local resources that they are using to leverage youth programming and providing direct service. So in the case of Birth to 22, probably one of the biggest players was our county agency, our municipal agency, who has a youth development department and special appropriation from the Board of County Commissioners. If you live in a Commonwealth like Delaware or Virginia, you're very familiar with this appropriation kind of process. And we were able to, through these conversations, through this youth master plan known as Birth to 22, convince them to incorporate SEL elements within their purchasing cycle. So they had an RFP formed and developed about 8 months in advance, and using comprehensive needs assessment, community conversations, all of this goodwill and momentum that we invested our time in, we were able to influence the formation of that RFP. So it was inclusive of SEL-facing services. And once it was released, partner agencies applying for those funds at the local level were able to align their plans, their intent within that RFP and make a real commitment to that common definition or common vision for SEL within the community. So it's an important question to ask yourself: who are the local partners that have funds, resources available, whether they be a municipality or a not-for-profit organization or a family foundation, and what are their funding cycles? How can you make that case for support prior to their funding cycle and cultivate that relationship so you're in a good position when those funds are released to be able to make that case? Last but not least, an important question to ask is, as a good partner, how can you advance their messages, right? So communication is a reciprocal process, and it's important to take stock of what kinds of communication assets or platforms your agency or your school district has to help advance their partner agency's mission and SEL-facing programming. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to touch families in the support of youth through social emotional learning. And we can do that if we have collaborative shared messages that are aligned and coordinated. So really take stock of your communications collateral and their communications collateral. And I strongly recommend working out a plan or an agreement to how those two can work together to complement one another. Next. So as I mentioned, the Birth to 22 SEL Action Team, I was really honored to be a co-lead on this team with OST, or an out-of-school time intermediary organization known as Primetime Palm Beach County. And in our roles, we were able to facilitate the collection of some of those SEL data, cultivate some of those partnerships and relationships, and refine our community definition for social emotional learning in Palm Beach County. This led to, as I mentioned, the formation of that common definition and the leveraging of that definition for additional local resources. So once the county was in the position to develop their RFP, we were able to just insert that community definition and ask our partners who were seeking funding, how do you see yourself within this definition? Justify the programs and delivery mechanisms that you can avail yourself of that will fulfill this mission. Next slide, please. And here's a quick sample of what that looks like. So within the RFP, the county literally laid out, we want a template that says, this is our agency name, this is our population, this is how we're aligned, these are the services we're going to provide to this level of detail. And millions of dollars have been awarded since that time at a local level, all in support of SEL and trauma-based care and other youth development programs that make Palm Beach County a healthier place for our families. So I really believe in that as a point, and I'm very interested in any kind of local success stories that you may have had, like Birth to 22. If you have a similar experience or questions, I think our contact information will be shared at the end, and I'd love to hear any of your local success stories whenever you have time. Next and last slide. think we're opening the floor for questions.
We are. Thank you very
Thank you.
much for wrapping us up, Dana. And thanks to all of our panelists. You all shared a lot of really great in-depth information in a nice, clear and concise way. And we've definitely had questions come in. The main question we've had is, of course, are they folks going to get the PowerPoint deck and a recording? Because I know there's a lot that people want to go back to and reference. And the answer to that is yes. You will be receiving an email that has a link to download the slide deck, as well as to access the recording. So just keep an eye on your email inbox for that in the next day or two, and we'll get it out to you as quick as we can. So as I mentioned, we did have some questions come in, so we're gonna just start diving into those and get through as many as we can. So we're gonna kind of go back in time to when Matt first kicked us off. And the first question for you, Matt, is there a listing of schools, programs, and grantees through Medicaid, CNCS, and CCDBG?
I'm not aware of a list of schools, but I believe you would be able to, if you went to the program pages, you'd be able to find examples of places that received grants. I also know that the CCSSO brief that I mentioned and linked to had a, they have examples of how some states are using Medicaid to improve condition of learning, and the CNCS brief on how you can use national service to support education and schools also had examples in that resource on examples of programs and that CNCS, AmeriCorps, and Vistas are using in schools to support education. It's not specific to SEL, but some of those programs do have SEL components to them.
Great, thank you. That was helpful. And actually, we had another question come in. I believe, Ellen, this was when you were speaking. We had a couple people ask if you could retell us the name of the federal website that provides technical assistance for SEL.
Oh, sure. It is, so the National Center is run by, it was a grant, the department awarded, it was a competitive process and awarded a grant to WestEd to run this new National Center. Why don't I don't have the exact website right at my fingertips, but could we put that in the follow-up as a resource?
Yes, yep.
Emily, is that okay? Yeah, I think that would be the best way to do it.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So once again, folks, you will get an email in the next day or so with a link to the recording and the PowerPoint deck. And our panelists have provided many, many resources that will be included in that follow-up email. So just keep an eye out for that, and we'll be sure to include the URL for that website in there as well. Michelle, you used the word partnership and also partnering quite a bit in your part of the presentation. And we had some folks who were really asking, what does that look like in a practical sense? Do you have an example that you could share?
I'm sorry, the last part of the question faded out for me.
Do you just have an example that you could share about how one of those partnerships really works in practicality?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're thinking about leveraging funds or braiding some of the funds, we actually look at going back to something that was said previously about looking at the needs assessment. If we look at the needs across the different programs, we can find where we align from Title IV to another program to be specific, and looking at where we can pick up some of the funds to be used out of one program versus the other. And I'm using Title IV Part B as an example in that, because it's after school. There's certain things that they can purchase and do that we cannot over on the Title IV Part A side, and the things that we can do that they cannot, we pick up the tab on that piece. When it comes to external partners that may be a company or an organization, or like the Florida Technology Council, leveraging opportunities to have those key stakeholders from around the state, the business professionals, come to our events, you know, at no cost to us, again, providing their expertise to assist us in a way that is also leveraging those resources in a different type of way.
Wonderful, thank you. That was a great example. Ellen, back to you. Is there a Title 4B or is Title 4B limited to implementation in grades K through 5, or can those funds be used for middle and high school students?
Oh, absolutely. No, K through 12. Absolutely. This is, yes, absolutely. It's across the K-12 spectrum.
Great. That is good to know. Jessica, you mentioned a while back now that states can revise their ESSA plans. Do you know how many states have done that? And if those modifications were to include more SEL programming?
Right. We don't know right now how many are doing that, but a number of states indicated in their originally submitted plans that they were planning on adding additional indicators, but wanted to take a year up to 2 years to kind of pilot those indicators and see how they work. A number of them were around the use of school climate surveys or other measures of a positive and safe and inclusive learning environment. And so what we were hoping to see is a number of those states, after they've kind of piloted and tested out the collection of that data and how it can be used, then proposing to amend their ESSA plans and incorporating them. The one thing I will add, however, is that for districts, even if some of these indicators are not in your statewide accountability system, a number of these indicators are required to be reported under ESSA or can be collected at the district level and be used to inform school improvement efforts.
Thank you, that was helpful. I think this question could be answered by anyone who cares to, and it is, how can charter schools obtain funding since they're not part of district funding structures?
This is Dana. So charter schools are part of district funding in terms of federal fund allocations. They are entitled to their direct share. Michelle, you're probably more equipped by virtue of your new role to speak to that, but we've distributed in my LEA that I just left, the 10th largest LEA, significant resources to charter schools for this purpose. Michelle?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Dana. So our charter schools are part of the public school allocation, and so districts, as they share out with all the schools, they do the same thing with the traditional school as they do with the charter school. So that has to be broken down in their budgets as they submit those applications to the district, to the state Title IV Part A office for approval.
Okay, that was great clarification. And we're getting close to time, but we're going to try to squeeze in at least 1 or 2 more questions here. So this might be back to you, Ellen, but others can feel free to chime in. When we look at Title IV funding, is a third-party research data needed to use that funding for SEL programs?
No, I do not believe so. Now, but I say that because it's not written in the statute that way, but once again, so this money goes to a state, the state gets it down to the LEA, and then the LEAs have control and run their own processes by which to get the money out the door. But maybe this is also, Michelle, am I right on that? It's not, it doesn't have, the programming, I believe, does not have to be validated by a third party.
You're right.
Yeah. But because everything is different, I just urge you, I think one of the big takeaways from this very informative webinar is, so there's Michelle's like this across the country, right? So you need to find out in your state, find that Title IV director, point person, et cetera, and make that person your best friend.
I totally agree with that. And if you don't have access to that, I actually have the national contact list. I'd be happy to share with anyone today. Or I can share with the facilitators and they can get that out.
That would be great, Michelle. Thank you.
Sure.
That would be an excellent resource. Okay, we're going to do one last question and then we'll wrap it up. Thanks to everyone who has asked questions. This is probably a longer question than we've got full time for, but we'll go for it. Do any of our panelists have examples of how they collaborate with service providers that are not non-for-profit organizations? As an example, before and after school providers whose programs are focused on SEL development. Michelle, is that something that you've got some experience with in Florida?
I'm sorry, for some reason I thought you said Michelle, then it broke up and I wasn't sure what you said at all. My apologies.
No, I didn't actually pinpoint you until just now, so you're good.
Yeah, I didn't hear the question either. So.
Oh, sorry. Folks are looking for some examples on how you might be partnering with organizations that are not non-for-profit, so for-profit organizations like a before and after school program provider.
Yeah, so one thing we do here in Florida, we have a series called a Webinet series. So all those folks who are for profit, who are interested in working with our districts, we invite them to come in to do a informational webinet, 20 minutes. We share that link out to our districts to see if there's any interest in knowing more. If we have more than 50% of our districts expressing interest, we will have a larger webinar for them to get information out statewide. And then we'll do a survey with our district's interest. So again, that helps our folks out, especially those districts that the lead is wearing multiple hats. It gives them an opportunity to be able to eliminate those barriers to going out and finding the right source. So we do a lot of that reviewing internally here, the Title IV Part A team, and then we get that information out to help our districts find the right fit for their projects.
That's
and this is Dana. I want to join Michelle's point at a local vantage point. So I may have understated that in the purchasing cycle of the master plan that I talked about, for-profit agencies did respond. That was not just exclusive to not-for-profit agencies. So my best advice to someone at a for-profit agency is be aware of those special taxing districts, local resources, if you're not your municipalities, to share that information with you and register for their purchasing and vendor RFP systems so that you get those alerts to be able to respond to.
Thanks. That was great advice from both Michelle and Dana. And unfortunately, we have reached the end of our time together, but thank you so much, all of our panelists, for sharing all of their expertise and insights. And thanks to all of you who took the time to join us today and to stay with us for this full 75 minutes. I know that's a big chunk out of folks' day, but I think it was well worth the time. And just as a reminder, keep an eye on your inbox, your email inbox, for a link to the presentation deck, the recording, and also these resources that we have mentioned throughout the presentation. Finally, as you log off from the webinar, you'll be prompted to take a quick survey. We would really appreciate if you would take a minute to answer the questions. Your responses are helpful to us in planning our future webinar programming and also to continue to improve our webinars. So thanks again, everyone, for joining, and have a great day and a great weekend.